Let's go over to Numbers chapter 10. All right. Actually, let's go to Numbers chapter 1. Let me read just a verse here. If you would, we'll continue our little study we're doing here on the book of Numbers and see what we can find. So let's have a word of prayer. Father, it's good to be with your people again. I do pray now that you'd bless our study. Might we get understanding here about the practical things of life as we go through these verses, not just in our relationship with you, but with other people, whether believers or non-believers, that we might be a blessing to all that we find ourselves with. And we'll thank you for that in Christ's name, and amen. All right, just let me give you a little reminder here. When you're Numbers chapter number 1 and verse number 1, let's read that. Then the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting. So the tabernacle was up. Now notice this. On the first of the second month, in the second year after they had come out of the land of Egypt. Okay? In the second year, in the second month that they've come out of the land of Egypt, and it was on the first day. Now, when I come back to chapter 10 then, if you would, come on back there with me. Chapter 10. Let's notice, if you would, verses 11 through 13. It says, now in the second year, in the second month, on the 20th of the month, the cloud was lifted from over the tabernacle of the testimony. And the sons of Israel set out on their journey from the wilderness of Sinai. Then the cloud settled down in the wilderness of Paran. So they moved out for the first time according to the commandment of the Lord through Moses. So what we see there from chapter 1 to chapter 10 is just 19 days. All right. And as you see this and remember what's going on, God organized and gave order to all the tribes. He put them all in a certain position, 3 tribes for each side of the tabernacle, actually, facing east, north, south, and west. And we looked at that. So all that was done within that short time frame that we see there, okay, where we had order and peace there, if you want to call it that, among the Jews there, okay, as you see that. But notice here, if you would, if you come down to chapter 10 and verse number 13, okay, 13, so they moved out for the first time according to the commandment of the Lord through Moses. Then I slide down, if you would, to verse 32, to the end of the chapter there. All right. It says, so it will be if you go with us, and this has to do, which I've kind of skipped, Moses gave an invitation to his extended family, to his father-in-law and his brother-in-law, to travel with them. All right. But when we come to 32, so it will be if you go with us, that whatever good the Lord does for us, we will do for you. Now, there's no indication that they went. In fact, it says here a little earlier, but no, we're not going that, we're going home, okay? So when I get to 33, it says this, thus they set out from the mount of the Lord 3 days' journey, with the ark of the covenant of the Lord journeying in the front of them for the 3 days to seek out a resting place for them. Now here's where something very interesting occurs. Skip down to verse 35. Skip 34. Then it came about when the ark set out that Moses said, rise up, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered, and let those who hate you flee from before you. 36. Then it came to rest. When it came to rest, I should say, he said, return, O Lord, to the myriad thousands of Israelites. Now, what we have here, a note that I found from Mr. Bullinger in the Companion Bible and some other commentaries is this, that the Hebrew word N-U-N, and actually it's a letter, we'd say it's the letter N. It appears in verses 35 and 36 upside down. And what that had to do with the Jews is this, the Hebrews, is that it was the sign of a parenthesis. All right? So what folks believe is this, that verse 35 and 36 come right after 33. And then 34 would be the last verse of we'd call it this chapter. 34 says, the cloud of the Lord was over them by day when they set out from the camp. Okay? So whether that means anything to us or not doesn't really matter, except in the Torah scroll of the Torah, that's how it's set up. All right? And Mr. Bollinger has a nice note on that if you look at that. Okay? So when I look at chapter 11 then, because now the Jews, Israel, I should say Israel, because they're not Jews yet. That name hasn't been given to them yet. When Israel's moving now, all right, we get down to chapter 11, verse 1, it says this, now the people became like those who complain of adversity in the hearing of the Lord. And when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp. Now that sounds, this is a New American Standard, but the Concordant Literal Version reads like this in verse 1. The people became like complainers, evil in the ears of Yahweh. And Young's literal translation, the first four words of verse 1 says this, the people is evil. Now, Susan and I sat last night, and she went through her phone. She has the app that has all the different translations, and read all these, and we found half of the translations say evil, evil, evil. Okay? And as you look at this, what happened, they've been in peace and contentment in those, since they've been almost since they've been in Sinai, except for the event of the golden calf, if you remember that. But all of a sudden now, what's happening? They're complaining against God. Okay? They have become complainers. The Hebrew reads like this, the people became complainers of evil. Well, that's kind of scary when you look at something like that. Slide down to verse number 10 with me of chapter 11, please. Verse number 10, where it says this. We already read verse number 1 that talked about his anger, the Lord's anger. Okay. Now I come down to verse 10. Now Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, each man at his doorway of his tent. And his anger, now notice what it says, of the Lord was kindled greatly, and Moses was displeased. Now, when you read this and think about it, and in context, we're not going to study this tonight, Moses was displeased with the Lord. Remember, Paul writes, be angry and sin not. All right? Well, Moses was kind of discouraged, is what it says here. Okay? And God took care of that for him by giving him 70 other men to help govern the whole nation. And you can read that, okay, as you go through chapter 11 there. Okay? That's what he did. But what was the problem with the people? Why were they complaining in evil? Well, if we turn to verse 18, all right, verse number 18, chapter 11, it says, say to the people, consecrate yourselves for tomorrow, and you shall eat meat. And you shall eat meat. For you have wept in the ears of the Lord, saying, oh, that someone would give us meat to eat. For we were well off, now listen, we were well off in Egypt. What were they in Egypt? Well, they were slaves. But evidently they were eating well, okay? Therefore the Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat. Now, slide back up to verse number 4 with me, all right? If you can do that. of this chapter. The rabble who were among them, now the rabble would be those non-Jews or non-Israelites that came out of Egypt with them, who were among them had greedy desires. And also the sons of Israel wept again and said, who will give us meat to eat? We remember the fish which we used to eat free in Egypt, the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlic. But now our appetite is gone. There's nothing at all to look at except this manna. And remember the manna. If you remember the story about the manna, all right? Now manna was like a coriander seed, and its appearance like that of bdellium, okay? And what they actually did was crushed it and they baked it. It was almost like bread for them to eat. But that's all they had. So what's happening? Well, you have the rabble here working them up, demanding, hey, we need to eat meat, all right? So we come back then to verse 18. We finish 18. And here's what Moses says there at the end of 18. Therefore the Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat. Well, that's nice, isn't it? Okay. Verse 19. You shall eat not 1 day, nor 2 days, nor 5 days, nor 10 days, nor 20 days, but a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils and becomes loathsome to you, because you have, now listen, rejected the Lord who is among you, and have wept before him, saying, why did we ever leave Egypt? So what are they doing here with God? Well, we'd say maybe, well, they're putting to a test. Perhaps not. They're not believing that the works of God are manifesting themselves in his love toward these people in taking them out of Egypt. They'd rather be back in Egypt because they want to eat meat. All right? And that's why this thing is considered evil, if you please. Okay? Evil, as verse number 1 indicates to us. So the Jews aren't doing very well in their travels, and they're only 3 days out as we look at this and as we see that. Okay? Why did we ever leave Egypt? Now you talk about a sad situation. It is. Slide over to chapter 11 still, and let's notice verses 31, if you would, down to 35. 31 to 35. Now here's where the quail comes in, the meat. Now there went forth a wind from the Lord, and it brought quail from the sea, and let them fall beside the camp, about a day's journey on this side and a day's journey on the other side. I really don't know how much a day's journey is, but if they could walk 10 miles, then if that's a day's journey, all right, then they had 10 miles worth of quail on either side of the camp. Then it says this, all around the camp and about 2 cubits deep on the surface of the ground. Now, cubit, I believe, is 18 inches, so you're talking about 3 foot here of quail laying on the ground. So it says the people spent all day and all night and all the next day and gathered the quail. He who gathered the least gathered 10 omers. Now, an omer, all right, according to what my research, is enough to carry on a donkey. In other words, it's quite heavy, okay? And they spread them out for themselves all around the camp, while the meat was still between their teeth before it was chewed. The anger of the Lord, now this is the 3rd time you read the anger of the Lord, all right, was kindled against the people, and the Lord struck the people with a very severe plague. So the name of that place was called Kibroth Hattaavah, because they buried the people who had been greedy. So this greed came out. They weren't satisfied with the manna. They wanted meat. Moses told them, hey, it's not for 1 day, 2 days. All these days you're going to have it until it's no longer a pleasant tree for you to eat. It's almost like they'll be sick of it. Okay? And so what does God do? Because they've rejected him, he feeds them, but it becomes a curse. Now, you say, Brother Dan, that's pretty tough. All right? Well, I want you to notice something with me, if you can. Mark chapter 11, we'll come back there. Come back to Exodus with me, if you would, in chapter 14. Can you do that? Exodus 14. So these people are complainers. We're going to see that here in a few minutes. But Exodus 14, notice with me, please, verses 11 through 15. Exodus 14, 11 through 14. Then they said to Moses, "Is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt with us in this way, bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, 'Leave us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians'? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." Now this is before they crossed the Red Sea, okay? But Moses said to the people, "Do not fear, stand by and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again forever. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silence." Now notice, they have a rebellious spirit here, complaining spirit. But you don't read that God is angry here, all right? Then do this. Come over to chapter 15, if you would. Chapter 15. And let's notice, if you would, verses 24 to 26. 24 to 26, all right? So the people grumbled at Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" Because in 22 they found no water, okay? "What shall we drink?" Then he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, and he threw it into the waters, and the waters became sweet. There he made for them a statute and regulation, and there he tested them. Who did? God did, okay? Because they were complaining. They had nothing to drink. But there's no punishment here. Then I come over to chapter 16. All right, chapter 16. Let's notice verses 2 through 4, okay? And up there in verse number 1, says this is the 15th day, the second month after their departure from Egypt, okay? So verse 2 says, "The whole congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The sons of Israel said to them, 'Would that we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat.'" Now, you notice this? "When we ate bread to the full, for you have brought us out of this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger." Then the Lord said to Moses, "Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them whether or not they will walk in my instructions." So again, they're complaining, but what does God do? He meets their need. All right, meets their need. Slide down to verses 8 and 9. Moses said, "This will happen when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening and bread to the full in the morning. For the Lord hears your grumblings, which you grumble against him. And what are we? Your grumblings are not against us, but against the Lord," he says. Against the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, "Say to all the congregation of the sons of Israel, 'Come near before the Lord, for he has heard your,'" what word? "Grumblings." Again, they're complaining here. Okay, we all got that? Now notice, be patient with me here. Come to verse number 20. "But they did not listen to Moses, and some left part of it until morning, and it bred worms and became foul, and Moses was angry with them." And remember, they were to take it when it fell and not keep it overnight. They were to use it, all right? But they didn't do that. So Moses becomes angry with the people here. So that brings us to verse 27, okay? Still in Exodus 16:27, where it says this. It came about on the seventh day that some of the people went out to gather, but they found none. Then the Lord said to Moses, how long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my instructions? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore he gives you bread for 2 days on the 6th day. Remain every man in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the 7th day. So on the 6th day, there was enough for 2 days for every family here. Okay, we're all that. Now here's what I want you to notice. When are the commandments given? What chapter of Exodus? Well, we go to chapter 20, right? So all these things that happen and they're complaining prior to the law being given, God doesn't say anything about it, even though they're grumbling against him, you see. God doesn't punish them. He meets their need, and he puts up with their mistakes about gathering too much, all right, and then going out on the Sabbath when they were supposed to get enough the day before. But there's no punishment here involved. But here's what I would like you to notice. Come to chapter 32, right? Please, chapter 32. Good review here of Exodus for us. Chapter 32, and notice 26, if you would, through 35. Okay? Now notice how it goes here. Now, what we remember is what? This is after the law is given. Okay? And what did I say? 26. Okay? Then Moses stood in the gate of the camp and said, whoever is for the Lord, come to me. Now, this is after the golden calf incident. Okay? And all the sons of Levi gathered together to him. He said to them, thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, every man of you put his sword upon his thigh, and go back and forth from the gate to the gate in the camp, and kill every man his brother, and every man his friend, and every man his neighbor. So the sons of Levi did as Moses instructed, and about 3,000 men of the people fell that day. Then Moses said, dedicate yourselves today to the Lord, for every man has been against his son and against his brother, in order that he may bestow a blessing upon you today. On the next day Moses said to the people, you yourselves have committed a great sin. And now I am going up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin. Now, this is after the law. Prior to the law, sin wasn't counted. Verse 31, then Moses returned to the Lord and said, alas, this people has committed a great sin, and they have made a god of gold for themselves. But now, if you will, forgive their sin, and if not, please blot me out from your book, which you have written. So he's offering himself as a sacrifice here. The Lord said to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot him out of my book. But go now, lead the people where I told you. Behold, my angel shall go before you. Nevertheless, in the day when I will punish them for their sin. Then the Lord smote the people because of what they did with the calf which Aaron had made. So there's a difference in the attitude that we see in Yahweh, actually. Pre-law and post-law, if you want to call it that, after the law was given. So now he's holding these people responsible for what they have done and what they have believed and, the actions they've taken. So when we come over here to, back to Numbers, if you would, in chapter 11, all right? Chapter 11. Now the people became like those who complained of adversity in the hearing of the Lord. Bitterly, adversity, bitterly, evil in their hearts and minds, okay? And when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, And the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp. So God started burning the outskirts of the camp here, all right, when this occurred. Now, one more time, keep your hand here and come to Psalm 78. Okay, Psalm 78. And watch what we have. I'm going to read 14, verse 14 through 22. Psalm 78. And in my Bible, it says here, the heading at the beginning of the psalm, God's guidance of his people in spite of their unfaithfulness. So I picked this up in verse 14. Then he led them with the cloud by day, and all the night with a light of fire. He split the rocks in the wilderness, and he gave them abundant drink like the ocean depths. He brought forth streams also from the rock, and caused the waters to run down. Yet they still continued to sin against him, to rebel against the Most High in the desert. And in their heart they put God to the test by asking food according to their desire. Then they spoke against God. They said, "Can God prepare a table in the wilderness? Behold, he struck the rocks so that the waters gushed out. The streams were overflowing. Can he give bread also? Will he provide meat for his people?" Therefore the Lord heard and was full of wrath, and a fire was kindled against Jacob, and anger also mounted against Israel, because they did not believe in God and did not trust in his salvation. Israel did not believe in God. They didn't believe in his salvation. What was their salvation? Freedom from Egypt. But they didn't consider their freedom from Egypt as salvation. They had a desire to do what? Go back there. Okay? For their belly's sake. You know, Paul says, whose God is their belly? You know, that sort of thing. You say, now, Brother Dan, what is the point of all this? Well, the point is this. And I'm going to read you something here. All right? And hang in here with me, if you would. Dennis Prager's Numbers commentary called God and Man in the Wilderness. All right? And it has to do with complaining. Are you a complainer? We all do now and then, don't we? Sure. Okay. But watch this. Is what Mr. Prager does in his chapters here, you know, as he gives notes and that, and he sure uses a lot of references to other people. Mr. Prager is a Jew, but he loves Christians and speaks very well about, you know, concerning our Lord Jesus Christ, if you would. But remember the context now. The context, we're in the Old Testament. We're after the law was given, and they're moving, all right? They're moving. They've gone 3 days. And what did we learn? We've learned that they're complainers, okay? Complainers. And it's evil, all right, to God what they're doing. So let me begin with this. The Hebrew word for good is tov, T-O-V. It appears 5 times in chapter 10 in reference to all the good that God did for the Israelites. In this chapter's opening verse, chapter 11, the word evil is used to describe the Israelites' response. Response to what? To God's good that he did for them. All right? The evil of the Israelites was their lack of gratitude. It was not the Israelites complaining that incensed God, nor is all complaining evil. Complaining is usually counterproductive, and it is almost always annoying to those who have to listen to a person complaining. But complaining is not necessarily evil. It is ingratitude that is evil. Now here's his essay. This will only take a few minutes, but see if you can grab on to some of these points. You might, take some of these to heart. You might know other people that need to take it to heart. All right. So he begins his essay by saying this: there is justified and unjustified complaining. Clearly, if one has undergone a traumatic event, the death of a loved one, receiving a terminal medical diagnosis, the loss of one's income, or myriad other awful events, complaining is certainly understandable. In fact, an event need not be traumatic. It is right, even necessary, to complain, for example, about poor service when one has paid for professional service. All right? But then he goes on. But in general, complaining, especially constant complaining, is bad. Here are several reasons, and he gives 8 reasons why complaining is bad. Number 1 is this: as was the case with the Israelites, constant complaining is a sign of ingratitude and unhappiness, one which feeds on itself, causing yet more complaining and more unhappiness. So what happens when you complain? Just continues, okay? The second thing is this: complaining is contagious. It spreads like a virus against which very few people have immunity. When one is with a complainer, it is very tempting to agree with the person and then chime in with one's own complaints. Been there, done that. Okay. The third point is this: constant complaining ruins relationships. Ask anyone married to a constant complainer or the parents of a constantly complaining son or daughter. What do you want to do? Say, eventually, most people try to minimize contact with a constant complainer. It's not a pleasant thing. Number 4, constant complainers see themselves as victims. And a victim mentally often leads people to either engage in bad behavior or support like-minded people who engage in bad behavior. Why? Because they see themselves as victims. It's everybody else's fault. See? Almost every violent criminal sees himself as a victim. Almost every violent national or ideological group is rooted in victimhood. Number 5, constant complaining prevents people from improving their lives. By definition, constant complaining means the complainer holds others individually and or collectively responsible for the complainer's problems. They will therefore not accept responsibility for any of their problems and for the need to work on themselves. That all makes sense to you all? Okay. 3 more here. Number 6. Constant complainers romanticize either the past, as Israel did. What did Israel want to do? Hey, we were back in Egypt, man, we had our bellies full, even though they were slaves, okay? They romanticize either the past, as Israel did, even about their enslavement in Egypt, or the future. That is why utopianism is another source of evil, as it makes people incapable of appreciating the good that they do have. Good and psychological healthy people attempt to enjoy the world in which they live while attempting to improve it. Okay? Number 7 is this. From a religious perspective, constant complaining is a denial of God's goodness and ultimately a rejection of God. God's goodness in chapter 10, 5 times is mentioned. But what happened when we got to chapter 11? the complaining begins. Okay? The complaining begins. Constant complaining means the world that God has made is defective. When the Israelites complained their lives were better in Egypt, they were saying God should not have liberated them. We are allowed and even encouraged to argue with God. That's what Moses does in chapter number 10. Because he felt God is putting the whole weight of the Israelite nation on his shoulders. But God took care of the problem by spreading it out. And as you read chapter 10, if you haven't read it yet, you'll find that Moses had the Spirit of God upon him. And when these 70 men were called out to the tabernacle with Moses, God took some of that Spirit and put it on the other 70. So it's kind of interesting when you read it. So to argue with God. Israel means struggle with God. Genesis 32:29. Remember Jacob with the angel all night long, fought with him? And Jacob asks, what is your name? Says, you don't need my name, but here's a blessing. Okay? But arguing with God is not all the same as complaining. Finally, number 8, the religious complainer is a living advertisement for atheism. You're denying God. Atheists. Grateful and happy religious people, on the other hand, are living arguments for God and religion. And he closes out by saying this. All the above notwithstanding, it is worth restating there are times when complaining is legitimate. But it has been my experience that many people with the most to complain about rarely complain. And many of those with the least to complain about complain the most. At the present time, in our feelings-based, victimhood-encouraging society, a commonly offered response to complainers is to say, I feel your pain, and a little more. That is not the Torah's response. From the Torah's perspective, the best response to those who complain is to offer them empathy, but also to challenge them to stop viewing themselves as victims, be grateful for the blessings they have, and to undertake actions necessary to improve their lives. Then he goes on, last sentence here, for those of us who use the Bible, and especially the Torah, to gain in the wisdom necessary to lead a good life, the Torah's and God's contempt for ingratitude and its manifestation in constant complaining is one of the great lessons of the book of Numbers. It's a sin, all right? If it was a sin then, it's a sin now. So here you had the Israelites receiving what? Salvation out of Egypt, all right? A year with God, all right? Preparing them for the travels up to the promised land. And what's the first thing that happens in their travels? They start complaining. Now, I don't know if you remember this, but in the last lesson that we did here 3 weeks ago or so, I challenged you to read through up to about chapter 22. And I said, see if you can find a pattern. Okay? Say, what were you talking about, Brother Dan? We'll watch. We see in Exodus the salvation. God brings them to Sinai. There he establishes order out of chaos with the people. Order and peace. Because they are what? Have been saved from their slavery in Egypt. Now he has to move them up to what we call the promised land. Okay, if you keep reading Numbers, we're not going to go through the whole book, but parts of it here, okay? And they're in the wilderness. And Mr. Prager calls his, his commentary, God and Man in the Wilderness. Okay? Then they ultimately end up where with Joshua? Into the Promised Land. It's a perfect picture of the Christian life. You get saved. God gives you contentment, gives you peace, all right, with Him. Takes away all the unnecessary things of life that just confuse you, in your Christian growth. And your Christian growth is like being, even though we have the Spirit of God in us, where are we? Well, we're walking in the world, but we're not of the world, so we're walking where? In the wilderness. And what are all of us waiting for? And I don't know how much you're waiting for it, but someday what's going to happen? You're going to take your last breath, and where are you going to be? In the Promised Land with God. So there's a pattern here in the book of Numbers that you see that you can equate over into the New Testament. Because what does Paul and the rest of the New Testament writers do? Paul, especially because he is the apostle to the Gentiles, okay, is trying to get them to realize what? God has saved you. He's brought you into a relationship with you, okay? And there's plenty of things that happen while we walk the face of this earth that people try to do what? We saw this last Sunday in the book of Galatians. These Judaizers, if you want to call it that. People trying to influence you away from whom? God. What is the biggest influencer in the world today? Anybody know? Nobody wants to talk about it. How about social media? I mean, you get stuck on something, and what happens? Over and over and over again, you hear about it. Mostly the negative. It's like the news since I've been born. The newspapers are rarely ever positive about anything. In fact, I haven't read a newspaper now in 15 years, at least. Okay. So social media, it's all negativity. Okay. Now, on some Facebooks I have, there's a lot of people that put blessings in there, good things, but most of it is the other way around. And we have to walk in our jobs, we have to go to the grocery stores, we have to doctors, deal with our children, all kinds of stuff that go on in the world today. But are we complainers, or are we putting our trust and faith in the one who is the center of everything? Our Lord Jesus Christ, who came to do what? Not just save you, but manifest you the very person of his Father. And that's where we need to be instead of complaining. I hate to say this to you. Susan and I are big proponents of NCIS, although we haven't seen a new show in 3 or 4 years because we don't have the normal TV stations, okay? But I remember a number of years ago, if you know who Ducky was, Dr. Mallard, okay? He did the autopsies and all that, and he had an assistant named Jimmy. Jimmy comes in one day, he's pulling his hair out. Dr. Mallard, I just been through hell. And Dr. Mallard didn't even ask him what it was about. He says, well, just remember this, young man. You're going through it. You'll come out the other side. And I think we need to realize about life and its problems. We go through problems, but you don't stop in the problem, all right? Do something about it. Take action. Put your trust and faith in our great God and Savior, okay? And that's what Israel did not do. So ultimately, what happened to this generation of Israelites? 20 years and up, none of them made it into the Promised Land except Caleb and Joshua and their families. So let's not be like the Israelites and complain and complain and complain. I don't care what you complain about. If you go to a restaurant and the service is bad, complain about it, get your money back. But don't be a complainer all the time about every little thing. Work through it, okay? Work through it. Get to talk to people, all right? Because life, as I always say, it's an adventure. And I think we need to remember that. It is an adventure. The Lord went through his adventure. Brother Paul went through. James, Peter, all the rest of the writers. Moses, you name it. They went through their adventure and ultimately came to be with their God. So I'll close with that. Does anybody have anything you'd like to add or subtract to that?